The gunshot that echoed across the valley that morning in 1878 was not meant for her, but it changed everything anyway. Adelaide Turner had been riding hard for 3 days straight, her chestnut mare frothing at the mouth and her own body screaming for rest. Behind her, somewhere in the dusty stretches of New Mexico territory, 5 men were hunting her like an animal. They wanted the deed to her father's silver claim, the one he had died protecting just a week ago in a back alley in Santa Fe. She had watched from the shadows as they beat him to death, too terrified to scream, too young to understand that silence would become her burden. Now she clutched that blood-stained deed inside her dress pocket and rode like the devil himself was on her heels. The Nevada border had never looked so beautiful. The landscape shifted from red rock to sage-covered plains, and somewhere ahead lay Las Vegas, a town her father had mentioned once as a place where a person could disappear if they needed to. She needed to disappear more than she needed her next breath. The mare stumbled, and Adelaide felt her heart drop. The horse had given everything, but there was nothing left. They were on the outskirts of what looked like ranch land now, fenced pastures stretching toward distant mountains. The sun beat down mercilessly, and her canteen had been empty since yesterday. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her face burned raw by wind and sun. That was when she heard the second gunshot, closer this time, and her mare reared in panic. Adelaide hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. She lay there gasping, watching her horse thunder away across the field, and knew she was finished. The men would find her here, and it would all be over. But the third shot never came. Instead, she heard the steady rhythm of boots on hard earth, measured and unhurried. She tried to push herself up, to run, but her body would not obey. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, and she found herself staring up into the most striking face she had ever seen. "Easy now," a deep voice said, and there was something in it that made her stop struggling. "Those shots were not for you. Had a rattler near the fence line." Adelaide blinked, trying to focus. The man was tall, built like he had been carved from the same hard earth he stood on. His eyes were a startling gray blue, weathered at the corners from years of squinting into the sun. Dark hair showed beneath his worn hat, and his jaw was shadowed with several days of stubble. He could not have been more than 26 or 27, she thought, though there was an older quality to his gaze, like he had seen too much too young. "Water?" she managed to croak. He did not hesitate. A canteen appeared at her lips, and she drank greedily until he pulled it away. "Slow," he said. "You will make yourself sick." "Men," she gasped, "following me." Something changed in his expression, a hardening that made her both afraid and strangely reassured. He scanned the horizon behind her, then looked back down. "How many?" "5. How far back?" "I do not know. Hours, maybe less." He made a decision quickly, hauling her to her feet, with surprising gentleness, despite his obvious strength. "My house is a quarter-mile that way. Can you walk?" Adelaide nodded, though she was not certain it was true. He kept one hand under her elbow, supporting more of her weight than she wanted to admit, and started walking. She noticed he still carried his rifle in the other hand, and his eyes never stopped moving, watching the landscape like a man who had learned not to trust empty spaces. "I am Asher," he said after a moment. "Asher Turner." She nearly stumbled. "Turner?" He glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "That means something to you?" "That is my name too, Adelaide Turner." She saw the surprise flicker across his face. "We are not related, I think. My father was from Ohio, originally. Mine was from Virginia, died in the war." He said it flatly, like he had long ago made peace with it. "Mother passed 2 years after. Been working this land alone since I was 19. The house came into view, a sturdy structure of adobe and wood that looked like it had been built to withstand anything the desert could throw at it. There were no decorations, no softness to it, just function and strength. A barn stood nearby, and she could see chickens scratching in a pen. It was a working ranch, clearly, though she saw no cattle in the immediate fields. Inside, the house was cool and dim, a relief from the burning sun. The main room was sparse but clean, with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, and little else. No pictures on the walls, no curtains on the windows. It was the home of a man who lived in silence and expected nothing from life but hard work. Asher guided her to a chair and brought her more water. "Drink slowly this time." Then he went to the window, rifle still in hand, and stood there watching the distance. Adelaide studied him as she sipped. He was utterly still, like a hawk perched on a fence post. Everything about him spoke of economy, of a man who wasted nothing, not movement, not words, not emotion. She wondered how long he had been alone out here, working this land in silence. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for helping me." He did not turn from the window. "Who are they? The men following you?" "Killers." Her voice broke on the word. "They murdered my father in Santa Fe. They want something he left me." "What?" She hesitated, then realized she had no choice but to trust him. "A deed to a silver claim." Now he did turn, and his expression was serious. "How valuable?" "Valuable enough to kill for." Asher was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You need to tell me everything." So she did. The words poured out of her, all the fear and grief she had been holding inside for a week. She told him about her father, a prospector who had finally struck it rich after 15 years of searching, about how he had registered the claim legally, how he had been so happy, talking about building her a real house, sending her to school back east, about the men who had approached him in Santa Fe, offering to buy the claim for a fraction of its worth, about how her father had refused and how she had watched from the shadows of a saloon alley as they beat him to death. "He saw me," she whispered, "at the end. He saw me hiding there, and he did not say anything, did not look at me. He protected me even while they were killing him." Asher's jaw was tight. "You know their names?" "Two of them. The leader is called Garrett Stone. The other one, the one who held my father while Stone beat him, that was his brother Marcus. I know those names." Asher's voice was hard as iron. "They have been working their way through this territory for 2 years, jumping claims and running off homesteaders. A lot of people have died, but no one can prove anything. They are smart about it." "They are animals," Adelaide said, and there was steel in her own voice now. "Animals I can respect. They kill for food, for survival." Asher checked the rifle, his movements practiced and efficient. "These men kill for greed. That is something lower." Adelaide stood on shaky legs and went to the window herself, though she was careful to stand to one side, not silhouetting herself. "Will you turn me over to them?" He looked at her like she had said something incomprehensible. "Why in God's name would I do that?" "Some men would, for the reward they are probably offering, or just to avoid trouble." "I am not some men." It was a simple statement, no bravado in it, just fact. "And I have no love for men like the Stones. But you do not know me. I could be lying." Asher studied her face for a long moment, and she felt stripped bare under that gaze. "You are not lying. I have seen enough liars to know." He turned back to the window. "Besides, we share a name. Has to count for something." Despite everything, Adelaide felt the ghost of a smile touch her lips. "That is not much of a reason." "It is reason enough for me." He was quiet a moment, then added, "I do not get much chance for conversation out here. Be ashamed to let them kill you before I have had my fill of it." It was so unexpected, so dry in its delivery, that Adelaide actually laughed. It was a short, startled sound, and it felt strange after a week of fear. But when she looked at Asher, she saw the corner of his mouth had lifted just slightly. They waited through the afternoon. Asher fed her, simple food, but good. Fresh bread and dried beef and beans cooked with chili peppers. She ate ravenously and apologized for her manners. "Eat," he said. "You need your strength." As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Adelaide found herself talking. She had not meant to, had not planned it, but the silence of the house seemed to invite words. She told him about growing up following her father from one mining camp to another, about her mother who had died when she was 6, about learning to shoot and ride and hold her own in rough towns where women were scarce and often treated as less than human. Asher listened, and she realized that was a rare quality. He did not interrupt, did not offer platitudes or advice. He simply listened with his whole attention, and somehow that made her feel heard in a way she had not felt in years. "Your father sounds like he was a good man," Asher said when she finally fell silent. "He was the best man I ever knew." Adelaide blinked back tears. "He deserved better than to die in an alley. Most good people do, does not mean they get it." Asher stood and checked the window again. "Sun will be down in an hour. If they are coming, it will be soon. They will want the light to find the house, but dusk to make their approach." "You have thought about this before." "Had to. This land, you learn to think like a predator, or you become prey. He looked at her, and his expression was serious. I need to know, Adelaide. Will you freeze if shooting starts? She met his gaze steadily. I watched my father die and did not scream. I rode 3 days straight with 5 killers on my trail. I will not freeze. He nodded slowly. Good. Can you shoot? My father taught me. Rifle or pistol? Both. Asher went to a cabinet and pulled out a Winchester rifle and a Colt revolver. He checked them both, then handed her the pistol. Winchester is mine. You take the Colt, 6 shots, and I have extra ammunition. He paused. I will not ask you to kill anyone, but if it comes to it, I need to know you can defend yourself while I am dealing with them. Adelaide took the Colt, feeling the familiar weight of it in her hand. I can defend myself. They did not have to wait long. As the sun touched the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Asher stiffened at the window. Riders, 4 of them, coming from the east. You said there were 5. One might be circling around, or you miscounted in your fear. He moved away from the window, thinking. They will try to talk first, feel out the situation. Stone is smart. He will not risk his men unless he has to. What do we do? I go out and talk to them. You stay here, out of sight. If they see you, the talking stops and the shooting starts. He looked at her. If I go down, there is a root cellar in the kitchen, hidden under a rug. Get in there and do not come out until you are sure they are gone. There is food and water for a week. And then what? Then you ride to Las Vegas, to the marshal's office. His name is Tom Hendricks, and he is honest. Show him the deed and tell him everything. He will help you. Adelaide felt something tighten in her chest. You talk like you are already dead. I talk like a man who plans for every outcome. Asher checked his rifle one more time, then looked at her with those startling eyes. But I do not plan to die today. I have too much work to do. He walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. Adelaide? Yes? It was good to hear another voice in this house. Been a long time since these walls heard anything but silence. Then he was gone, stepping out into the fading light. Adelaide moved to the window, staying back in the shadows where she could see without being seen. Her heart hammered in her chest as she watched Asher walk out to meet the riders, his rifle held casually, but ready. The 4 men reined in about 20 yards from the house, and even from this distance she could see the tension in their postures. The lead rider was tall and broad, with a blonde beard and a hat that looked expensive. That would be Garrett Stone. She recognized the others too, their faces burned into her memory from that terrible night in Santa Fe. Evening, Asher called, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. You are on private land. Stone smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. Sorry about that, friend. We are tracking a horse thief. Young woman, probably riding a chestnut mare. You seen anyone like that? I see a lot of things out here. Mostly I see strangers who do not belong. Now, that is not very neighborly. Stone shifted in his saddle. We have a legal warrant for this woman. She stole something valuable from her employer in Santa Fe. That's so? Asher's voice was flat. Then you will not mind riding into Las Vegas and talking to Marshal Hendricks. I am sure he will be happy to help you with your legal business. Stone's smile faded. We have already wasted enough time on this trail. The woman came this way. Her horse left tracks right up to your fence line. Lot of horses pass through here. This is open range country. Your name would not be Turner, would it? This from one of the other men, a mean-looking character with a scar across his cheek. Asher's posture did not change, but Adelaide saw his grip shift slightly on the rifle. What if it is? The woman we are tracking is named Adelaide Turner. Funny coincidence, you having the same name and her horse leading right to your door. Turner is a common enough name, and I have not seen any woman. Asher's voice stayed level, but there was iron underneath it. Now, I have been polite, but my patience is wearing thin. You are on my land, and I am asking you to leave. Stone's hand moved toward his gun, and Adelaide felt her whole body tense. But Asher was faster than she would have thought possible. The rifle came up smooth and easy, aimed directly at Stone's chest. I would reconsider that, Asher said quietly. For a long moment, nobody moved. The air felt electric with potential violence. Then Stone laughed, though it sounded forced. Easy, friend. No need for things to get unpleasant. We will ride on. He pulled his horse around, and the others followed suit. But before they left, he looked back at Asher. If you do happen to see this woman, you should know there is $1,000 reward for her return. That is a lot of money for a man working a ranch alone. If I needed money that bad, I would find an honest way to earn it. Asher kept the rifle up until they were 50 yards away, then lowered it slowly. Adelaide watched the riders disappear into the gathering dusk, but she did not feel relieved. When Asher came back inside, she saw her own thoughts reflected in his face. "They will come back," she said. "Tonight, probably. They know you are here, or at least they are close to certain." He set the rifle down and began checking the windows, making sure they were secure. Stone wants that deed bad enough to risk open murder, which means he is desperate. Desperate men do stupid things. "I should leave. I should not have brought this to your door." Asher turned to look at her, and there was something fierce in his eyes. "Where would you go? You are exhausted, your horse is gone, and they are out there waiting. You leave now, and you will be dead before sunrise." He moved closer, and Adelaide caught the scent of leather and sage and something uniquely him. "I did not pull you off my land just to send you to your death." "But why?" The question burst out of her. "Why risk yourself for a stranger?" He was quiet for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression, became almost vulnerable. "I told you, I have been alone out here for 7 years. 7 years of silence, of talking to horses and chickens in empty fields. When I heard you hit the ground today, when I went to see what had happened and found you there, fighting to breathe, refusing to give up." He paused. It was like the whole world suddenly had sound again. Like I had been deaf and did not know it until I heard your voice. Adelaide felt something shift inside her chest, something warm and terrifying all at once. "That is not a reason to die." "Maybe not." Asher's mouth curved into a small smile. "But it is a reason to fight." They spent the next hour preparing. Asher showed her the root cellar, made sure she knew where everything was. He positioned her near a window with the Colt and extra ammunition, then took his own position near the door. The house had only 2 windows and 1 door, which meant limited entry points but also limited escape routes. "If they come, they will try to burn us out or rush the door," Asher said. "Stone has 4 men left, maybe 5, if there is one we did not see. That is bad odds, but we have position and preparation. It will be enough." "You sound very certain." "I am certain of my shooting. I am certain of these walls. And I am certain that I have survived worse odds than this." He looked at her across the dimness of the room. "I was at Adobe Walls 4 years back. 28 men held off 700 Comanche and Kiowa warriors for 3 days. I learned something about defense that day." Adelaide felt a chill. She had heard of the Battle of Adobe Walls, the famous stand of buffalo hunters against overwhelming odds. "You were one of the 28? I was 22 and stupid enough to think hunting buffalo was going to make me rich." His voice was quiet, distant. "It did not. But it taught me how to shoot and how to stay calm when everything is trying to kill you. I guess that is worth something." Before Adelaide could respond, the first shot shattered the window behind her. She dropped instinctively, glass raining down around her, and heard Asher's rifle boom in response. 2 more shots came fast, splintering the doorframe, and then she heard shouts outside. "Stay low," Asher commanded, his voice utterly calm despite the chaos. He fired again, and she heard a scream of pain from outside. "That is 1 down." Adelaide risked a glance through the broken window and saw muzzle flashes in the darkness. 4 separate positions, which meant all 5 men were here. They had the house surrounded. "Fire blind," Asher said. "Above your window line. Make them think twice about their positions." She did, the Colt bucking in her hand, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. She fired 3 shots in quick succession, spacing them out to cover different angles, then ducked back down to reload. The return fire was immediate and heavy, bullets punching through the adobe walls, sending dust and debris flying. But Asher had been right about these walls. They were thick, 2 feet of compressed earth and stone, and the bullets did not penetrate deep enough to be deadly. Asher fired twice more, quick and precise, and she heard another cry of pain. 2 down, he said, and there was no satisfaction in his voice, just cold assessment. The shooting stopped suddenly, leaving a ringing silence. Adelaide's ears were screaming, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She reloaded with shaking hands, focusing on the mechanical task to keep the fear at bay. "They are talking," Asher said quietly, "deciding whether to risk rushing us or fall back. What do you think they will do? Stone is proud. He will see retreat as weakness. Asher moved to the other window, checking angles. But he is also smart. He has lost 2 men, maybe more. The odds are not in his favor anymore. A voice called from the darkness. Turner, we can make a deal here. Just send out the woman and nobody else has to die. Asher did not answer, which was answer enough. You are going to die for a woman you do not even know? Stone's voice was angry now. For a stranger and a thief? She is not a thief, Asher called back, and I know her well enough. Last chance, Turner. Send her out or we burn you out. Adelaide saw Asher's jaw tighten. Fire was the one thing these walls could not stop. If you had enough men to do that safely, you would have done it already, he shouted. You are down 2, maybe 3. You want to risk the rest dying to get one woman? Silence from the darkness. Adelaide held her breath, waiting. Then, this is not over. It is for tonight, Asher said. They waited another hour, weapons ready, but no more shots came. Finally, Asher moved carefully to the door and eased it open a crack, peering out into the darkness. After a long moment, he opened it wider and stepped out, rifle ready. Adelaide followed against his silent gesture to stay inside. She could not sit there not knowing. Together, they found the 2 downed men. One was dead, shot through the chest. The other was bleeding badly from a leg wound, but still alive. Please, the wounded man gasped. Help me. Asher stood over him, and in the moonlight his face was hard as granite. Where are the others? Gone, rode back toward Las Vegas. The man's face was pale with blood loss. Stone is crazy. He said we would come back with more men. How many more? I do not know. Please, I need a doctor. Asher looked at Adelaide, and she saw the question in his eyes. She knew what he was asking. This man had tried to kill them, had probably killed others for Stone. They would be within their rights to leave him here to die. Bring him inside, she heard herself say. I will do what I can. Something shifted in Asher's expression, a warmth that had not been there before. He nodded and hauled the wounded man to his feet, half carrying him into the house. They spent the rest of the night in a strange domesticity of violence. Adelaide cleaned and bandaged the leg wound while Asher kept watch. The bullet had gone through muscle, but missed the bone, which meant the man might keep his leg if infection did not set in. Adelaide worked with hands that remembered her father, teaching her to dress wounds in mining camps where doctors were scarce. Why are you helping me? The wounded man asked at one point, his voice thick with laudanum that Asher had produced from a cabinet. Because I am not like you, Adelaide said simply. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Asher finally allowed himself to relax slightly. They had dragged the dead man far from the house and covered him with rocks. The wounded man was sleeping fitfully on Asher's bed, and Adelaide and Asher sat at the table, drinking coffee so strong it could strip paint, both too wired to sleep. What now? Adelaide asked. Asher was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee like it held answers. Stone will be back, probably with 10 or 15 men. We cannot hold against those odds. Then I should leave, go to Las Vegas, to the marshal. With what horse? And Stone will have men watching the roads. Asher shook his head. No, we need another plan. I have been thinking about that deed, Adelaide said slowly. Why Stone wants it so badly? My father said the claim was rich, but there are other rich claims in New Mexico. Why this one? What do you mean? I mean, what if it is not just about silver? What if there is something else? She pulled the deed from her pocket, unfolding it carefully. It was stained with her father's blood, the paper creased and worn. Look at the location, Glorieta Pass. Asher leaned forward, studying the document. That is high country, near the old Santa Fe Trail route, strategic location. And right near where the railroad is planning to expand. Adelaide felt her excitement growing. My father mentioned it once, said the railroad companies were buying up land along the proposed routes, paying fortunes for the rights. So it is not about the silver at all. Understanding dawned in Asher's eyes. It is about the land itself. Stone must have a deal with one of the railroad companies, acting as a buyer. Your father's claim sits right where they need to run track. And if my father would not sell, they would take it anyway. Adelaide felt the grief and anger mixing in her chest. They killed him for a railroad route. Asher reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her since helping her walk to the house, and Adelaide felt that touch like an electric current. His hand was rough with calluses, warm and solid, and she did not want him to let go. "Then we prove it," Asher said quietly. "We take this to Marshal Hendricks, along with Stone's man as a witness. We show them what Stone really is." "Will he talk?" Adelaide glanced toward the bedroom where the wounded man slept. "He will if he wants to avoid a noose. Attempted murder and claim jumping are hanging offenses." Asher squeezed her hand gently. "I will take him in myself today. You stay here, hidden. The house is yours while I am gone." "No," Adelaide said it firmly. "I am coming with you. It is too dangerous. Everything is dangerous now. At least in town I will have witnesses and a marshal." She looked at him steadily. "And I will not hide while you risk yourself for me again." Asher studied her face for a long moment, and Adelaide saw respect growing in those gray-blue eyes. "You are stubborn. I have been told that before. It is not a criticism." His mouth curved into that small smile she was beginning to recognize. "I like it." They prepared quickly. Asher hitched up a wagon, reasoning that the wounded man could not sit a horse. They loaded him into the back, still groggy from laudanum, and covered him with a tarp. Adelaide sat up front with Asher, the Colt hidden in her dress, her eyes scanning the landscape constantly. Las Vegas was 12 miles away, and they made the journey in tense silence. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a furnace, and Adelaide felt sweat running down her back. But she did not complain. Asher had given her his hat to shade her face, insisting he was used to the sun, and somehow that small gesture felt more intimate than anything that had passed between them. "Tell me about your ranch," she said after a while, needing to break the tension. "How long have you been there?" 7 years, like I said. Bought the land with money I saved from buffalo hunting, and some I inherited when my mother died." He kept his eyes on the road, but she could hear something soften in his voice. "Started with nothing but a tent and big dreams. Built the house myself, stone by stone. Dug the well, fenced the pastures." "What do you raise?" "Cattle mostly. Had a small herd, sold them off last month. Planning to rebuild this fall." He glanced at her. "It is a hard life. The land fights you for everything. But it is mine, you know? Nobody can take it from me." Adelaide understood that feeling more than she could say. "That is what my father wanted. A piece of land that was ours, where nobody could push us around anymore. He left you something valuable, Adelaide. Not just the claim, but the fight to keep it. That is worth more than silver or railroad rights." They saw Las Vegas in the distance, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden structures sprawled along the Galenas River. It was bigger than Adelaide had expected, maybe 800 people, with a railroad depot and several saloons lining the main street. The town had a rough edge to it, but also a sense of permanence, like it was growing roots. Asher drove straight to the marshal's office, a small building near the center of town. Marshal Tom Hendricks was a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened to their story without interrupting, his expression growing darker as they talked. "I know Garrett Stone," he said when they finished. "Been trying to pin something on him for 2 years, but he is smart, always keeps his hands clean. If what you are saying is true, if that man in your wagon will testify, I can finally bring him in." "He will testify," Asher said. "He is looking at a noose otherwise." Hendricks nodded slowly. "Let me talk to him." He stood, then looked at Adelaide. "Miss Turner, I am sorry about your father. I heard about that killing in Santa Fe, but nobody knew who did it. With this testimony, we might get justice for him." Adelaide felt her throat tighten. "Thank you, Marshal." They spent the next several hours in the marshal's office while Hendricks questioned the wounded man, whose name turned out to be Jack Reeves. At first, Reeves was sullen and uncooperative, but when Hendricks laid out his options in stark terms, he began to talk. He confirmed everything. Stone was working for the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, buying up land along the proposed southern route. When property owners would not sell, Stone used intimidation and murder. Adelaide's father had been the 5th claim holder to die in the past year, all of them made to look like accidents or random violence. "There is more," Reeves said, his voice weak. "Stone has a partner in this, someone high up in the territorial government, someone who can make legal documents disappear and forge new deeds." "Who?" Hendricks demanded. "I do not know," Stone never said, but I heard him mention the capital, Santa Fe, and someone called the judge. Hendricks exchanged a glance with Asher. That is troubling. If he has political protection, this gets complicated. Can you still arrest him? Adelaide asked. I can and I will, but we need to move fast before word reaches his partner. Hendricks stood decisively. I will deputize 6 men and ride out today. Stone is probably holed up at his ranch outside town. We will bring him in. I want to come, Adelaide said. No. Both Hendricks and Asher said it simultaneously. This is too dangerous, the marshal continued. You are a witness now, Miss Turner. I need you safe. The marshal is right, Asher said, though she could see he hated agreeing. You should stay in town, somewhere Stone's men cannot reach you. Adelaide wanted to argue, but she could see the sense in it. Where? The boarding house, Hendricks suggested. Mrs. Chen runs it, and she is tougher than any gunfighter I ever met. Nobody will bother you there. So it was decided. Asher drove Adelaide to the boarding house, a neat 2-story building painted white with blue trim. Mrs. Chen was a Chinese woman of indeterminate age, with eyes like a hawk and a shotgun propped behind her desk. She took one look at Adelaide and nodded. You stay here. You are safe, she said, in accented but clear English. I protect my guests. Asher paid for a week in advance over Adelaide's protests. At the door, he paused and looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. I have to go with the marshal, he said. Help track Stone. I know. But I will come back. He said it like a promise. When this is done, I will come back for you. Adelaide felt her heart skip. Why? Because in one day, you filled 7 years of silence. Because you are brave and stubborn, and you shoot when you have to, and show mercy when you can. He reached up and touched her face, just the lightest brush of his fingers against her cheek. Because when I heard your voice in my empty fields, something in me woke up that I thought was dead. Then he was gone, climbing back into the wagon, driving away to join the marshal's posse. Adelaide stood in the doorway and watched until he disappeared around a corner, feeling like her heart was riding away with him. The next 2 days were the longest of Adelaide's life. Mrs. Chen was kind but firm, insisting Adelaide stay inside where it was safe. Adelaide spent the hours pacing her small room, cleaning her father's deed over and over, and trying not to imagine all the ways Asher could die. She had known him for less than 2 days, but somehow he had become essential to her, like air or water. The way he moved with such quiet confidence, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the dry humor that surfaced at unexpected moments, the way he had stood against 5 armed men without hesitation, not for money or glory, but simply because it was right. On the afternoon of the second day, Mrs. Chen knocked on her door. Someone here to see you. Adelaide's heart leaped, but when she came downstairs, it was not Asher. It was a woman in her 30s, well-dressed in a traveling suit, with intelligent eyes and a leather satchel over her shoulder. Miss Turner, my name is Elizabeth Warren. I am a reporter for the Santa Fe newspaper. She offered her hand. I heard about what happened to your father, and I have been investigating the land sales along the railroad route. I would like to hear your story. Adelaide hesitated, but something in the woman's straightforward manner reassured her. They sat in Mrs. Chen's parlor, and Adelaide told her everything. Elizabeth took notes rapidly, her face growing more animated as the story unfolded. This is exactly what I have been looking for. Proof of corruption linking Stone to railroad interests and political figures. If I can publish this, it could bring down the whole operation. The marshal said Stone has a partner, someone called the judge. Elizabeth's expression turned grim. Judge Thornton Hayes. He sits on the territorial bench in Santa Fe. I have suspected him for months, but could not prove anything. If your witness testifies to that connection, Hayes is finished. What about Stone? Marshal Hendricks rode out yesterday with 8 men to arrest him. I have not heard if they were successful yet. Elizabeth paused. I also heard Asher Turner is riding with them. Something in her tone made Adelaide look up sharply. You know Asher? Everyone in Las Vegas knows Asher, though most have never spoken to him. He comes to town maybe twice a year, buys supplies, and leaves, keeps to himself completely. Elizabeth smiled slightly. There are plenty of women who have tried to catch his attention, but he has never shown interest in anyone, as far as I know. Adelaide felt an odd flutter in her chest. He is a good man. He must be, to risk his life for a stranger. Elizabeth studied Adelaide's face. "Though something tells me you are not strangers anymore." Before Adelaide could respond, they heard shouting from the street. Both women rushed to the window and saw riders coming into town, moving fast. Adelaide's heart stopped when she recognized Marshal Hendricks at the lead, and beside him, dusty but alive, was Asher. She was out the door before she could think, running down the street in a way that was entirely improper and not caring at all. Asher saw her coming and dismounted in one smooth motion, and then she was in his arms and he was holding her tight and everything was all right. "You are safe," she breathed against his chest. "So are you." His voice was rough. "I was worried." Hendricks cleared his throat pointedly, and Adelaide stepped back, suddenly aware they had an audience. Her cheeks burned, but Asher kept one hand on her arm, like he could not quite let go. "Did you get him?" she asked. Hendricks nodded grimly. "We got him, Stone and 3 of his men. They are in custody now, and they will hang for what they have done." "And the judge?" "That will take longer, but Miss Warren's article will start the process. With Reeves' testimony and your father's deed, we have enough to open an investigation." Hendricks looked tired, but satisfied. "You did good, Miss Turner. Your father would be proud." The trial happened 2 weeks later. Fast by territorial standards, but slow for Adelaide, who spent every day waiting. Asher came to town and took a room at the boarding house as well, much to the interest of the local gossips. He and Adelaide spent hours together, talking in misses. Chen's parlor, or walking the streets of Las Vegas with proper chaperonage. Adelaide learned that Asher was not naturally silent, just selective with his words. When he chose to speak, he was thoughtful and often funny in his dry way. He told her about growing up in Virginia before the war, about his father dying at Gettysburg when Asher was 12, about his mother's long decline into grief that finally took her when he was 18. "I came west because there was nothing left for me in Virginia," he said one evening, as they sat on the boarding house porch watching the sunset. "Everything I knew was burned or dead or changed beyond recognition. I wanted to start over somewhere that had no memories." "Did it work?" Adelaide asked. "For a while. The land is hard enough that it does not leave much room for thinking about the past. You work from dawn to dusk just to survive, and by the time you fall into bed, you are too tired for ghosts." He looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his eyes. "But it was lonely, Adelaide. I did not realize how lonely until I heard your voice." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I am glad I fell in that field." "I am too, though I wish it had been under better circumstances." The trial itself was swift and brutal. Reeves testified, and his testimony was damning. Stone tried to bluster and deny, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury took less than an hour to return a guilty verdict on all counts. Judge Hayes was arrested the same day, his political career in ruins. When the verdict was read, Adelaide felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had been carrying since her father's death. Justice would not bring him back, but it meant his death had not been meaningless. It meant other claim holders would be safer. It meant something. Asher was there in the courtroom, sitting beside her, and when she began to cry, he put his arm around her and let her lean against his solid strength. She felt the eyes of the town on them, knew the gossips would have a field day, and did not care at all. After the trial, Elizabeth Warren's article appeared in newspapers across the territory, exposing the corruption and land fraud. Adelaide's story became public knowledge, and suddenly she was not just a woman with a claim, but a symbol of resistance against corporate greed. She hated the attention, but endured it with as much grace as she could manage. Through it all, Asher was there, not hovering, not smothering, just present in his quiet way. He dealt with reporters when she could not face them, stood between her and the curious townspeople, and made sure she ate and slept when grief threatened to overwhelm her. "You do not have to do this," she told him one day. "Take care of me, I mean. You have your own life, your ranch. The ranch will still be there." He looked at her seriously. "And I am not taking care of you. I am being here with you. There is a difference." "What difference?" "Taking care of you would mean I think you are helpless, that you need me to survive. Being here with you means I choose to be with you, because I want to, because it makes my life better." He reached for her hand. "You are the strongest person I have ever met, Adelaide. You do not need taking care of. But maybe you need someone to stand beside you while you handle things yourself." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different tears. "How are you real?" He smiled that small smile she had come to love. I could ask you the same thing. 3 weeks after the trial, Adelaide had to make a decision about her father's claim. The railroad company, desperate to avoid further scandal, offered to buy it at a fair price. It was enough money to live on for years, to start over anywhere she wanted. "What will you do?" Asher asked. They were sitting by the Galenas River, watching the water flow past, enjoying a rare moment of peace. "I do not know," Adelaide admitted. "Part of me wants to keep the claim, work it myself, prove that they did not win. But another part just wants to be done with it, to move forward. There is no wrong answer. What would you do?" Asher was quiet for a long moment, watching the river. "I would ask myself what I really want, not what I think I should want, or what would honor my father's memory, or what would prove a point. Just what would make me happy." He looked at her. "What would make you happy, Adelaide?" She knew the answer immediately, had known it for days, but been afraid to say it. "You. Being with you makes me happy." His expression softened, became almost tender. "Then sell the claim. Take the money and be free of it. You have already won, Adelaide. You brought down Stone and Hayes. You got justice for your father. You do not owe that claim anything more. And then what? Then you do whatever you want." He paused, and she saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes for the first time. "Though, if you wanted, you could come back to the ranch with me." Adelaide's heart began to pound. "Are you asking me to live with you?" "I am asking you to marry me." Asher said it simply, but she could hear the tension underneath. "I know it is too soon. I know we have only known each other a few weeks. But Adelaide, I cannot imagine going back to that house without you. Cannot imagine working those fields in silence again, not now that I know what it is like to hear your voice." "Asher, you do not have to answer now. Take your time, think about it. I know ranch life is hard, and you deserve better than a man who is still learning how to talk after 7 years of silence." He took both her hands in his, and his grip was trembling slightly. "But I love you. I fell in love with you the moment you looked up at me from my field, bleeding and terrified and still fighting. And if you will have me, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." Adelaide felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "You love me? So much it scares me." "Good." She laughed through the tears. "Because I love you too, and it terrifies me." "So is that a yes?" "That is a yes, you stubborn man. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will come to your ranch. Yes to all of it." Asher pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and it was like everything in the world suddenly made sense. The past weeks of fear and grief and uncertainty, the loss of her father, the violence and danger, all of it had led to this moment, to this man, to this chance at happiness she had never expected to find. They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the Las Vegas church. Mrs. Chen stood as witness, along with Marshall Hendricks and Elizabeth Warren, who insisted on writing about the wedding for her newspaper. Adelaide wore a simple dress of blue calico, the nicest thing she could find in the town's general store, and Asher wore his cleanest clothes and looked more nervous than he had, facing down Stone's men. "I have never been married before," he confessed as they stood at the altar. "What if I am terrible at it?" "Then we will learn together," Adelaide whispered back. "I have never been married either." The ceremony was short, the words traditional, but when Asher slipped a simple gold band on her finger and promised to love and cherish her, Adelaide felt like she was making a promise to herself too. She was choosing happiness, choosing life, choosing to move forward instead of being trapped by grief. They rode back to the ranch in Asher's wagon, now repaired and restocked with supplies. Adelaide watched the landscape change from town to open range, and instead of fear, she felt anticipation. This would be her home now, these empty fields that had once been silent. The house looked different when they arrived as the sun was setting. It was still simple, still stark, but Adelaide saw its potential, saw where she could plant a garden, where curtains would soften the windows, where their life together would fill the empty spaces. "It is not much," Asher said, sounding uncertain. "It is perfect." Adelaide turned to him and smiled. "It is ours." That first night as husband and wife, they lay in Asher's bed and talked until late. Adelaide told him more about her father, the good memories she wanted to hold on to. Asher talked about his dreams for the ranch, the herd he wanted to build, the improvements he had always wanted to make but never felt motivated to complete alone. "Now I have a reason," he said, pulling her close. "Want to make this place worthy of you." "It already is," Adelaide murmured against his chest. "Because you are here." They made love slowly, gently, learning each other with a patience that spoke of a lifetime ahead. Adelaide had never been with a man before, and Asher was careful and tender, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When they finally came together completely, it felt like a promise made with bodies instead of words. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Asher said quietly, "I was so alone before you came. I did not realize how alone until it stopped." Adelaide kissed his shoulder. "You will never be alone again. I promise." The months that followed were a revelation to Adelaide. Ranch life was indeed hard, harder than anything she had done before. The days started before dawn and ended well after dusk. There was always work to be done. Animals to feed, fences to mend, crops to tend, supplies to manage. Her hands, already calloused from her years following her father, grew tougher. Her skin darkened from the sun, despite wearing Asher's spare hat. But she had never been happier. Working beside Asher, she discovered the deep satisfaction of building something together. They planted a garden, and she nearly cried when the first vegetables pushed through the soil. They bought a small herd of cattle with part of the money from the claim sale, and Adelaide learned to rope and brand alongside her husband. They painted the house inside and out, and Adelaide made curtains from fabric they bought in Las Vegas. Most importantly, they filled the silence. Adelaide sang while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her, and hymns from church, and sometimes just nonsense she made up on the spot. Asher would listen while he mended harness or worked leather, that small smile playing at his mouth. He began to whistle while he worked, a habit he said he had forgotten he had. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch they had built together, and Asher would tell stories about his buffalo hunting days or his time at Adobe Walls. Adelaide would read aloud from books they borrowed from the town library, and they would talk about what they had read, debating ideas and characters. "I never thought I could have this," Asher confessed one evening as they watched the stars emerge. "Thought I was meant to be alone." "I never thought I could have it either," Adelaide said. "Thought I would follow my father from camp to camp until I was old, and that would be my life." "Are you happy?" He asked it carefully, like he was afraid of the answer. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be." She took his hand. "Are you?" "So happy it still scares me sometimes, like I will wake up and find it was all a dream." "It is not a dream." Adelaide kissed him. "We are real, and this is real, and we get to keep it." 6 months after their wedding, Adelaide realized she was pregnant. The realization came slowly at first, then all at once, and she felt a mixture of joy and terror. She waited until she was certain, then told Asher one evening after dinner. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen from him, and he picked her up and spun her around, laughing. "Careful!" she protested, laughing too. "You will make me dizzy." "A baby," he said, setting her down gently, his hands on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy about it?" "Happy? Adelaide, I am—" He seemed to search for words. "I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. A family, I am going to have a family." The pregnancy was not easy. Adelaide was sick most mornings, and the work of the ranch became harder as her belly grew. But Asher was endlessly patient, taking on more of the heavy work, making sure she rested, bringing her water and food even when she insisted she did not need it. "You are fussing," she told him one day, exasperated but touched. "I am caring," he corrected. "There is a difference. You said you were not taking care of me. I said I would not treat you as helpless. You are not helpless. You are growing a human being inside you, which is considerably harder than anything I do all day." He kissed her forehead. "The least I can do is bring you water." As winter settled over Nevada, Adelaide's belly grew round and full. They prepared the house for the baby, Asher building a cradle from smooth pine wood, sanding it until there was no possibility of splinters. Adelaide sewed tiny clothes from soft fabric, each stitch a prayer for the child to come. The baby came in late February, during a brief warm spell that felt like a blessing. The labor was long and difficult, and Adelaide understood for the first time why her father had spoken of her mother's death with such sorrow. Mrs. Chen had come to stay for the birthing, along with the town's midwife, a capable woman named Sarah who had delivered half the babies in Las Vegas. Asher paced outside for hours until finally Sarah opened the door and called him in. Adelaide was exhausted, soaked with sweat, but alive and smiling, and in her arms was a tiny, perfect baby boy. "A son," Sarah said, beaming, "healthy and strong." Asher approached slowly, like he was afraid to break the moment. He looked down at his son, this tiny person they had created together, and Adelaide saw tears in his eyes. "What should we name him?" she asked softly. "I want to name him after your father," Asher said, "if that is all right with you." Adelaide felt her own tears start. Father's name was Frank Oliver Turner. "Then this is Frank Turner," Asher said, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. Frank Turner, born in silence and brought into love. Raising a baby on a ranch was its own kind of challenge. Frank was a good baby, healthy and strong, but he needed constant attention. Adelaide learned to work with him strapped to her back in a sling Asher had fashioned and to nurse him while doing other tasks. Sleep became a precious commodity, stolen in short bursts between feedings. But watching Asher with his son was worth every sleepless night. The man who had lived alone in silence for 7 years proved to be an unexpectedly gentle father. He would walk Frank around the property, pointing out birds and animals, telling him about the land in a soft voice Adelaide had never heard him use before. He changed diapers without complaint, sang lullabies in his rough voice, and spent hours just watching Frank sleep, like he was memorizing every moment. "I never knew I could love something this much," he confessed one night, holding Frank against his chest while Adelaide rested. "It is terrifying." "That is how I feel about both of you," Adelaide said, "like my heart is walking around outside my body." The years that followed were full of work and joy in equal measure. Frank grew into a curious, energetic toddler who wanted to help with everything and understand how everything worked. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Flora, and another son they called Aaron. The house that had been built for silence and solitude was now filled with noise and life and love. Asher expanded the ranch, buying adjacent land and building up his herd. Adelaide started raising chickens and selling eggs in town, and began a small business making leather goods that brought in steady income. Together, they built something that was uniquely theirs, a life neither had imagined possible, but both treasured beyond measure. Elizabeth Warren visited sometimes, bringing news from the wider world, and always trying to convince Adelaide to write her story for publication. Adelaide always refused, saying some stories were meant to be lived rather than told. But she enjoyed Elizabeth's visits, the reminder that there was a world beyond their ranch, even if she had no desire to rejoin it. Marshall Hendricks became a regular visitor too, stopping by on his rounds to share a meal and play with the children. He had grown older, gray at the temples now, but his eyes were still sharp and his commitment to justice unwavering. "You two give me hope," he said one evening, bouncing Flora on his knee, while Frank showed off his roping skills to Aaron. "In a territory that can be so hard and violent, you built something good here, something that lasts." "We got lucky," Asher said, his arm around Adelaide's shoulders as they watched their children play. "Luck had nothing to do with it," Hendricks corrected. "You chose each other, every day. That is not luck, that is commitment." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Asher took Adelaide back to the spot where she had fallen from her horse all those years ago. The field was green now, nourished by the irrigation system they had built together. Cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, and they could hear their children's laughter carried on the wind from the house. "I come here sometimes," Asher admitted, "when I need to remember." "Remember what?" "That life can change in a moment, that the worst day can lead to the best thing that ever happened to you." He pulled her close. "That silence is not peace, it is just absence, and that your voice filled something in me I did not know was empty." Adelaide kissed him, tasting salt and sun and the familiar comfort of a decade together. "You filled something in me, too. Purpose, I think. A reason to stop running and start building. Do you ever regret it, giving up the claim, staying here instead of going somewhere easier?" "Never." She said it firmly. "This land, this life, it is ours, Asher. We built it together from nothing. Our children will grow up here, and maybe their children too. That is worth more than any silver claim or easy life in a city." "I love you," he said, Yet it was both the simplest and most important thing in the world. I have loved you since the moment I heard your voice in my field, and I will love you until the day I die. Good, Adelaide said, smiling against his mouth, because you are stuck with me now, Turner, for better or worse, in silence or in noise, you are mine, and I am yours. They stood there in the field as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange and purple. From the house, they could hear Frank calling them for dinner, Flora singing one of Adelaide's songs, Aaron demanding to know where his parents had gone. We should get back, Adelaide said, but she did not move. In a minute, Asher replied, holding her tighter. Let me remember this. You and me and the life we built. Want to hold it for just one more minute. So they stood there together as the light faded, two people who had found each other through violence and fear and had chosen to build something beautiful instead. The fields that had once known only silence now rang with laughter and song, and the thousand small sounds of a family living and loving and growing. And when they finally walked back to the house, hand in hand, it was to a home full of warmth and noise and love, to children who ran to greet them, and a life that neither had dared to dream of, but both had earned through courage and choice and the simple decision to fill the silence with each other's voices. The story of Adelaide and Asher Turner became something of a legend in Las Vegas, Nevada, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was so beautifully ordinary. A man working his land in silence, a woman fleeing for her life, and the moment their paths crossed, that changed everything. It was a story about finding home in another person, about building a life from nothing but determination and love, about the way two broken people could heal each other simply by choosing to stay. And in the evening, when the work was done and the children were in bed, Asher and Adelaide would sit on their porch and talk like they had on that first terrible night, when 5 killers were circling and death seemed certain. They would hold hands and watch the stars and be grateful for every moment they had been given. Tell me something, Adelaide said one such evening, many years into their marriage, their hair now threaded with silver and their hands marked by decades of work. Anything, Asher replied, as he always did. If you could go back to that day, to before I fell in your field, would you? Would you choose the silence again, if you could? Asher was quiet for a long moment, and Adelaide knew he was giving the question the serious consideration it deserved. Finally, he said, The silence was not peace, Adelaide. It was just waiting for something to wake me up, to remind me what it meant to be alive. He squeezed her hand. So no, I would not go back, not for anything. Because every good thing in my life came from the moment I heard your voice fill my empty fields. And that, Adelaide thought, was the truest thing she had ever heard. Their life had not been easy, and it had not been perfect. They had struggled and fought and survived together. They had built something from nothing, raised children in a harsh land, and made a home in a place that offered no guarantees. But it had been theirs, every moment of it, from that first desperate day to this peaceful evening. It had been real and hard and beautiful, and they had chosen it together. As the stars emerged overhead and the desert night settled around them, Adelaide leaned against her husband's shoulder and smiled. The silence of the empty fields was long gone, replaced by the rich, full sound of a life well lived and deeply loved. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered, not the violence that had brought them together or the hardships they had overcome, but the simple, profound truth that two lonely people had found each other and decided to stay, filling the silence with love and laughter and the everyday miracle of choosing each other again and again and again for all the days of their lives. Their children grew and eventually brought home partners of their own. Frank married a school teacher from Las Vegas and brought her to live on the expanding Turner Ranch. Flora chose a doctor and moved to Santa Fe, though she visited often with her growing family. Aaron, restless like his mother had been, went east to study engineering, but always returned for summers, drawn back to the land his parents had built. The ranch became known throughout Nevada as a model of what hard work and dedication could accomplish. Asher and Adelaide were respected not just for their success, but for their fairness in dealing with neighbors and their willingness to help others. The man who had once lived in silence became known for his quiet wisdom, and the woman who had arrived fleeing for her life became a pillar of the community. But for Asher and Adelaide, the real measure of their success was not the size of their herd or the respect of their neighbors. It was the laughter that filled their home, the grandchildren who ran through their fields, the life they had built from moments of grace and daily choices to love. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Asher stood and raised a glass. His hair was white now, his face deeply lined by sun and time, but his eyes were still that startling gray blue. And when he looked at Adelaide, they were as warm as they had been on that first day. "About 40 years ago," he said, his voice still strong despite his age, "I was a man working my land in silence, thinking that was all life had to offer. And then this woman fell into my field, and everything changed." He looked at Adelaide, and she saw the boy he had been, the young man scarred by war and loss, and the man he had become through love. She filled my empty fields with her voice, and then with her laughter, and then with the sound of our children and grandchildren. She taught me that silence is not strength, it is just loneliness, and that the bravest thing a person can do is choose to love, even when life has given you every reason not to. Adelaide stood and took his hand, her own eyes bright with tears. "And he taught me that home is not a place, it is a person. That safety is not found in running, but in standing still with someone you trust. That love is built in daily choices and quiet moments and hands held through hard times." They kissed then. To the cheers and applause of their family, two people who had found each other through chance and chosen each other through determination, who had built a legacy not of wealth or fame, but of love and commitment and the simple, profound act of filling silence with shared life. And when the party was over and the family had gone, Asher and Adelaide walked out to their field one more time, the place where their story had begun. They stood there in the starlight, older now, but still standing, still together, still choosing each other. 40 more years?" Asher asked, a smile in his voice. "At least," Adelaide replied, squeezing his hand. And the fields that had once been empty and silent stood witness to a love that had endured, had grown, had filled the emptiness with something that would last long after both of them were gone. Their children would remember, and their children's children, the story of how a cowboy worked his land in silence until her voice filled the empty fields, and how that single moment of grace had blossomed into a lifetime of love. It was not a story of dramatic rescues or grand gestures, though it had started with both. It was a story of two people who had been broken by life and put back together by choosing each other, day after day, year after year, through joy and sorrow, hardship and celebration, silence and song. And in the end, that was the most romantic story of all. Not love at first sight, though there had been attraction and connection. Not destiny, though it felt fated in retrospect. But choice, deliberate and repeated, to stay and build and love and fill the silence with a life lived together. The Turner Ranch would stand for generations, a testament to what could be built by two people willing to work for it. But the real legacy of Asher and Adelaide Turner was not the land or the house or the prosperous business they had created. It was the love they had built, as solid and enduring as the Nevada mountains, as warm and life-giving as desert rain, as constant and reliable as the sun rising over their empty fields that were empty no more. And that legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the way Frank held his wife's hand during difficulties, in the way Flora sang while she worked just like her mother had, in the way Aaron returned again and again to the land his parents had loved. It lived on in the stories they told and the values they passed down and the simple understanding that love was not something you fell into and hoped would last, but something you built with your own hands day by day, choice by choice, word by word. As Asher and Adelaide walked back to their house that night, their hands still clasped as they had been for 40 years, the fields around them whispered with wind and memory. And if you listened carefully, you could hear beneath the wind an echo of that first day, of a woman's gasp as she hit the ground and a man's steady voice saying, "Easy now." You could hear the beginning of everything, the moment when silence ended and love began. And that, in the end, was enough. It was everything. It was the whole story, from beginning to end, of how love could grow in the hardest soil, how two people could find each other in the vast emptiness of the West, and how a voice could fill fields that had been empty for too long. They lived the rest of their years in the house they had built together, working the land until their bodies could no longer do the heavy work, and even then, supervising and advising, teaching grandchildren the lessons they had learned over a lifetime. And when Adelaide finally passed, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76, Asher sat beside her and held her hand and whispered, "Thank you for filling my silence." He followed her 6 months later, his heart simply deciding it was time to stop. They buried him next to Adelaide in the small cemetery plot on the ranch, under a cottonwood tree they had planted together 45 years before. The headstones were simple, just their names and dates, and underneath, the words Asher had insisted be carved, "Her voice filled my empty fields." The story of Adelaide and Asher Turner became part of the history of Las Vegas, Nevada, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. But those who had known them, who had seen the way they looked at each other even after decades together, knew that the story was better than any legend. It was real and true, and proof that even in the hardest places, love could not just survive, but thrive. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blows across the Nevada desert and through the fields of the Turner Ranch, some say you can still hear it. The sound of a woman's voice, singing while she works, filling the empty spaces with joy and life and love that lasted beyond death, beyond time, beyond anything except the memory of two people who chose each other and built something beautiful in the silence.